Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's proceeding. This is the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. My name is Robert Hawkins. I am the Yellowknife Centre MLA and as well the Chair of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. Before we begin, I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. I will start off with my far left to the very end, and we'll work our way around the room and then go online to any member that's currently there. That said, if you would begin, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is George. I'm the George Near Sioux MLA for the Mackenzie Delta. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Danny McNeely, representing the Sato region. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Julian Morse, member for FrameLink.
Good afternoon. I'm Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, colleagues. And online, I believe we have at least one member from what I see, if she would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello to everyone in the room. Apologies I can't be there in person. My name is Kate Reed. I'm the MLA for Great Slave.
Thank you, everyone. So today we are joined by the Honourable Minister for Industry, Tourism and Investment and her officials to receive a briefing on the Socio-Economic Agreement Program. And now, as we pass the microphone on to the Minister for the public briefing, I am looking forward to this presentation, as I assume our millions of subscribers are as well. That said, I'm sure it's going to be an exciting one for one and all. Madam Minister, if you want to do lead into the presentation, and of course when it gets to question time, we'll figure that one out when we get there. Thank you. It's Otto.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and we certainly hope to deliver on your expectations of excitement today. So thank you to yourself and the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment for inviting myself and officials from ITI and our partner departments in this as well, ECE and Health and Social Services, to appear before you today to provide a briefing on Socio-Economic Agreement Program Review and Redesign. With me today is Pamela Strand, Deputy Minister of ITI, Menzie McEachran, Assistant Deputy Minister, Mineral and Petroleum Resources with ITI, as well as Diana Beck, who's the Director of Mineral and Petroleum Resources at ITI. In addition, we've got representatives from both ECE and Health and Social Services, starting with Deputy Minister Jamie Fulford. We also have the Director of Labour Market Programs, who's Sarah Madsen. And from Health and Social Services, we have Jeannie Matheson, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister for Health. Socioeconomic agreements are one of the most important tools we have as a government to maximize benefits for Northern residents, businesses, and communities. Socioeconomic agreements have helped create opportunities for NWT residents. Since the first socioeconomic agreement was signed in 1996, nearly $21 billion in procurement spending has gone to NWT-based businesses, with more than $9 billion spent with Indigenous NWT businesses. The diamond mine signatories of socioeconomic agreements have also created more than 36,000 person-years of employment for NWT residents, including 824 person-years of employment in 2025 alone. With our diamond mines either closing or nearing the end of their productive lives, we want to ensure that the next generation of resource sector projects and socioeconomic agreements continue to and further maximize benefits for all NWT residents. Our work on the Socioeconomic Agreement Program redesign will support these efforts. This redesign work was intentionally undertaken alongside the co-development of regulations under the Mineral Resources Act, recognizing that socioeconomic agreements must ultimately operate within a new legislative and regulatory framework. While this alignment has taken time, it is essential to ensuring the new policy is sound and effective for future agreements. Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment requested this briefing to review the status of the Socioeconomic Agreement Program Review and the GNWT's implementation of the recommendations. This is important and complex work, as there are many cross-cutting considerations to consider. Today's presentation will summarize the Socioeconomic Agreement Program Review and its recommendations, explain the program redesign responses, outline what is underway, what depends on the Mineral Resources Act and what remains, and clarify how these changes improve accountability, outcomes, and the separation of benefits from impacts. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'd like to invite Menzie McEachran to walk committee through the key elements of the review and how we are working our way through the implementation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Minister, Assistant Deputy, if you'd lead us through the presentation. Again, we look forward to that as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Minister, for the introduction. So today, as the Minister said, we'll be sharing information with you on the SCA program review and redesign. And without further ado, I'll jump right into the slides. The 19th Legislative Assembly, as part of a mandate item to adopt a benefit retention approach to economic development, directed GNWT to initiate an independent review of the Socio-Economic Agreement program to increase the success in meeting objectives under socio-economic agreements. This has been a multi-year, multi-phased project. The first phase was the SCA program review, and that started in 2021 and was completed in 2022. The second phase was SCA program redesign, which really is part of our current work, and it's a dynamic phase with some implementation activities already occurring, and a number of activities or elements of scope that require integration within our Mineral Resources Act regulations, work and functions, and implementation activities. Phase 3 is implementation, and so there is some overlap between redesign and implementation, as I mentioned. There are some things that we can do now, and others that require MRA to come into force, and then still others for consideration in the future in terms of recommendations that perhaps have more significant resourcing considerations. Lastly, I'll talk about next steps after going through these slides. All right, so firstly, there are some key considerations within the SCA program review world. First of all, they must not interfere with any trade agreements with which the NWT is involved. So SCAs, however, I should add that they are allowed, they're not prohibited by these agreements wherever we have an exception in such trade agreements with other jurisdictions across Canada. And these rules and exceptions include performance requirements that are covered in Chapter 3 of the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. There's also general exceptions for measures with respect to Aboriginal peoples in Chapter 8 of the CFTA. And there's NWT party-specific exceptions. Now, the Committee on Internal Trade table across Canada has, as we likely have seen over the last year or so in the news, has asked jurisdictions to reduce or remove all party-specific exceptions to reduce trade and mobility barriers. This is a key element of our national competitiveness and economic resilience. Canada has removed all of their party-specific exceptions under the CFTA at the federal level. That said, the NWT does not consider its party-specific exceptions to be trade barriers. Instead, we see these as carefully scoped tools that serve to protect and promote the interests of NWT residents and Indigenous governments as a developing economy here in Canada. Next slide, please. So that's kind of a cross-jurisdictional context that we must respect and sit ourselves within. Now let's dive into the phase 1 of our multi-year initiative here, which was the program review. Mentioned that it was a mandate item, so it certainly was a big part of our work through the 19th Legislative Assembly. And that mandate was released in February 2020. As a bit of background, a few years prior to that, the Department of Finance's Program Review Office had begun to look at the effectiveness and the efficiency of socioeconomic agreements in response to the recommendations of the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act environmental audit, which, as we know, comes out every 5 years and definitely helps inform work across multiple departments here at GNWT. Based on that recommendation from the program review, we contracted an independent evaluator who was DPRA to help us conduct the program review, which focused on 4 areas, scope areas, which are, shall we say, fairly typical in program evaluation. First of all, on the element of effectiveness, have the SEAs achieved their intended outcomes? For relevance, are the current SEA indicators the most relevant ways to document performance against desired outcomes and areas for improvement? 3, administration. Are SEAs the most appropriate mechanism through which to garner socioeconomic benefits from large projects? And finally, from a sustainability perspective, are benefits sustained after the life of a project? What are the net benefits over time? A term we often hear is the legacy of projects. So DPRA collected data through to November 2021. It hosted roundtable discussions, conducted interviews, focus group discussions, and carried out online surveys. GNWT departments were engaged, as were industry stakeholders, Indigenous governments and organizations, NWT businesses, women's organizations like the NWT Native Women's Association, regulators, as well as educational and training organizations. Now, this committee, your committee, in its request, asked us to speak to a report regarding the program review, produced by a technical advisory panel. And I should clarify that while a technical advisory panel consisting of representatives from the Yellowknives Dene First Nation, Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation, NWT Métis Nation, North Slave Métis Alliance, Clecho Government, and Det'anchogh First Nation, as well as the Native Women's Association of NWT, all oversaw the process and guided both the SEA program review as well as the subsequent SEA program redesign. The panel did not prepare its own report and recommendations. The SEA program review final report, the evaluation report, was completed in May 2022, and the report provided included feedback from the various roundtable discussions. There were 6 of them of the technical advisory panel. And we supported this technical advisory panel through contribution agreements through both the review and redesign phases. Next slide, please. So what was the meat and potatoes of the report? There were 14 recommendations across 12 key areas coming out of that report. It's a several hundred-page report. And normally I'm not one to read from slides, but in this case I will, because it's important to kind of cover the bases here in these key areas. So, redesign the SEA program, develop regulations under the Mineral Resources Act to comply with the SEA commitments, focus SEAs as benefit retention agreements, leaving impacts to be largely monitored and mitigated through other mechanisms, such as environmental assessments. And that was really after concluding that SEAs are not suitable mechanisms for mitigating negative socioeconomic impacts. Another recommendation was to use stronger language, include an implementation plan, address mine closure, identify commitment desired outcomes, include realistic and achievable targets, ensure greater collaboration between GNWT departments and address the need for sufficient human resources capacity within GNWT departments to administer the program. Increase involvement of impacted communities, target education and training, and then also to regularly review the SEAs and associated programming. Next slide, please. So, that's what came out of the review phase. Now we move on to the redesign phase. To follow up on those recommendations, we engaged a new contractor, MNP, to create actionable considerations for GNWT to improve the SEA program. Also during this time, we held a Socio-Economic Forum in Yellowknife in December 2022, which was attended by industry, Indigenous governments, and nonprofit organizations. And that work was really to respond to the very first top of the list recommendation in the 2022 program review report, which was to redesign the SEA program. The contractor MNP conducted interviews with GNWT staff across multiple departments. Additional technical advisory panel meetings were held with the Indigenous government representatives in 2023 and 2024, and a SEA program redesign final report was completed in 2024 in June, which provided actionable considerations for us as a government. So, the final report outlines these considerations for us to pursue or to choose to pursue and separates them into sort of categories of immediately implementable with existing or minimal additional resources, and those for perhaps longer term consideration that may be larger draws on resources for the GNWT. And we see that the actions from this report, excuse me, really boil down to 7 different thematic areas. One is improve governance of SEAs, transform and standardize performance measurement associated with SEAs, expand the roles and responsibilities of Indigenous government organizations. This, and we see this cropping up again, transfer existing responsibility to lead impact monitoring and mitigation to health and social services, implement enforcement responsibilities in a separate work unit for SEAs. So in other words, the ongoing day-to-day administration of the program should be kind of separated from the enforcement function. And to implement an advisory board to oversee SEA commitments. This is not a separate advisory board for every single SEA. This would be a sort of bird's eye view board to oversee SEAs as a whole, and improve training and education programming supports. So following the release of this report, departments met and reviewed these considerations. In March 2025, SEA department ADMs identified actions that could be initiated right now, which actions could be implemented under the Mineral Resources Act and as it comes into force with those regulations and associated policy guidance, and which actions required further work and resourcing for future implementation. Next slide, please. So, looking at the sort of buckets that I just mentioned, the initial implementation, we see, first of all, that there's work underway. So developing a terms of reference, a policy guide, and an annual implementation schedule for the updated SEA program. All of these things together, which can be considered sort of program governance documentation, will improve interdepartmental communications and information sharing processes by formalizing the accountabilities and responsibilities of the different SEA departments and ensuring that the reports, meetings, and other deliverables are completed in a timely manner. SEA departments will review these documents, suggest changes, and approve them as work to implement as part of our sort of annual cycle and schedules. Another element that is in progress here is standardized reporting requirements and dates. This improves communication and relationships with mines by reducing confusion about reporting dates and regular meeting schedules. This is something we've already actioned. In the past, we were getting data and reports from mines at various times throughout the year, and it was very difficult to compare and contrast and then fulfill our own GNWT annual reporting requirements. Finally, another thing that is active right now is developing a program logic model and performance measurement and evaluation framework for the SCA program. So we certainly identified things that that could be actioned along the short term and are working on these internally. All right, moving on to MRA considerations. This is the second bucket I touched on for implementation phasing or scoping. The Mineral Resources Act is something that this committee and many folks have heard a lot about. It enables the establishment of requirements relating to the benefits for the people of the Northwest Territories. So there is that space, that authority within the Mineral Resources Act for socioeconomic agreements, and of course, as you likely know, benefit agreements between Indigenous governments and resource sector project proponents. So we are developing the regulations for that act under the Legislative Development Protocol, which is an intergovernmental council approved protocol, and with Indigenous governments around the table at a technical working group, and we're working through those regulations as we speak. And one element of the work we're doing at that table, or of the regulations, is that in order to get a production license, a company will need to negotiate a socioeconomic agreement with us as GNWT, as well as benefit agreements with affected Indigenous governments. And it needs a production license in order to sell minerals. So the following elements are, shall we say, MRA related. First, to finalize an advisory body, the MRA needs to come into force. It's the MRA regulations itself that will give birth to this SEA advisory body. And planning for the implementation of that advisory body will include representatives from industry, GNWT departments, and Indigenous governments. And certainly we want to continue with that meaningful participation of Indigenous governments in the creation of that advisory body, as well as participation ongoing in the implementation of that advisory body. It will be comprised of representatives from communities who will speak on behalf of Indigenous governments and report on activities, and as well as solicit feedback from community members on improvements that can be made to SEAs writ large. And certainly one thing that is an objective here with the advisory body is to reduce engagement fatigue by replacing multiple project-specific bodies, which we see with existing diamond mines, with a single sort of overarching advisory body. And of course, it saves costs as well. All right, enforcement of SCAs will also be done within a newly created regulatory division that we have underway at Industry, Tourism, and Investment. We are going through a reorganization to prepare ourselves for implementation of the Mineral Resources Act. And part of that work is separating the sort of planning, policy, strategy, delivery functions from the regulatory functions that we're responsible for. And regulatory functions would include under the, not just the Mineral Resources Act, but also the Oil and Gas Operations Act and Petroleum Resources Act. Next slide, please. So our final sort of bucket for considerations are those for the future, TBD or ones that may require resourcing and further planning to implement. First of all, to finalize responsibilities related to impact monitoring and mitigation in line with a GNWT impact mitigation framework or other sorts of legislative levers. For example, there is socioeconomic assessment and impact monitoring and mitigation capability through environmental assessments currently. And there's no dedicated program, however, currently to address negative socioeconomic impacts from resource development activities. Benefit agreements support the distribution of project-related benefits, things like employment, training, procurement, etc., as well as community legacy projects, but not on the sort of impact mitigation side of things. So how can these be addressed in the future? I mentioned the environmental assessment enabling mechanism, but what does that actually look like on the ground in terms of resourcing or programs for monitoring and mitigation of socioeconomic impacts from resource sector activities? I should add, though, that on the topic of benefits, it does include community health and wellness benefits. So we certainly anticipate that those types of benefits and programs that companies support during their projects, we'd want to continue to see those and have seen a lot of value in those over the years. Also, another element of future considerations is the performing periodic evaluations of the administration and effectiveness of SEAs as a program. Clearly, the work that we've just been describing today is a good example of that, although one which took a massive amount of work and a lot of time. So we would probably want to move towards a sort of periodic evaluation approach that was more nimble and sort of rinse and repeat style. Regular SEA performance meetings and updates is another concept for future consideration, allowing adaptive management actions to be taken that target performance improvement of all the key players. So wanting to keep these things always targeted on being better, doing better, and more. And finally, there's the potential to identify training and education opportunities across GNWT programs that contribute to SEA outcome achievement. That work can be done with, of course, participation of Indigenous governments and organizations, industry, and training providers. So this could include, for training and education, focusing on identifying opportunities within existing GNWT programs that contribute to SEA outcome achievement. There's certainly a lot that we already have that we can build on. And we are confident that a lot of current programming aligns with SEA commitments, and with a bit of coordination can strengthen outcomes from these programs to improve the sorts of targets that we have for SEA performance on things like northern employment, training, and procurement. So another thing that can be done there is to look at what the program gaps are. Of course, we want to make the most out of current programs, but there legitimately may be gaps. And engagement with communities, industry, and training providers would help identify these gaps. And in identifying the supported labor market programs, the number of graduates, reasons for non-completion, etc., for current training programs, we would be aiming to get better data for better decision support in terms of identifying gaps, identifying potential solutions, gaining useful insight for future program design. And finally, to support access to programming in assisting students to transition from school into trades employment. We know trades is a super high demand area of work for the resource sector projects. Examples include the Schools North Apprenticeship Program and student financial assistance, of course, itself. In summary, there have been some challenges moving forward with some of the SEA-related considerations and associated policy work, given some uncertainty caused by the work that we're doing right now at the Mineral Resources Act regulations table that will govern SEAs and from a regulatory authority perspective and associated policy guidance perspective. That said, we can affirm that from both the MRA regulations development process and the SEA program review and redesign, that all of these things have informed and continue to inform each other in terms of ideas, best practices, and actionable solutions. And any SEA considerations or policy decisions we make in the future will certainly be MRA compliant. And with that, I'd like to thank committee and all of the people listening online for your time this afternoon, and hope this provides some answers to your questions. We're certainly, as a group, happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Assistant Deputy Minister. That was very good, very detailed and high level, and I would like to think that we should probably turn the heat up in the room a little more. It's quite hot for our viewers who can't see that, but it is quite warm in here, although not the hottest day we've had before us. That said, I do appreciate the presentation. It is a lot to consume, and it's clear that a lot of levers are moving forward, but it's still being worked on in a manner of, as you pointed out, even working with or tying to the MRAs. So that said, I'm going to lean into committee a little bit. I do have Ms. MLA Reid first, who'd like to ask a couple of questions, and we'll just sort of flow through the process from there. MLA Reid, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the officials and Minister from ITI today for joining us and walking us through this important piece. I kind of want to take a couple steps back and just sort of look at this through the lens of someone who, a member of the public who may not really have the same grounding as the officials here today in socioeconomic agreements. And so when we talk about benefit agreements, when we talk about making sure that dollars in the North stay in the North with Northerners, with Indigenous Northerners in particular, can the minister speak to a bit about what has worked in the past, what hasn't, and what's the most important thing to get right as we move forward? I know that the DPRA produced recommendations around this, but I would like to hear from the minister specifically. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you for that. Who would like to field the first question? Minister, if you would. We've got the mics now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, certainly over the course of the last 30 years, we've seen some areas where there's been some definite wins as far as local benefit retention, and then some areas where we can do better. One of the things that we've noted is that when companies have their headquarters or hiring offices located in the Northwest Territories, that certainly there is a different connection to community, different connection to workforce that happens, and we often see that reflected in the percentages of Northern workforce. So that certainly has proven to be a success, and you do see the numbers change as headquarter locations change or hiring office locations change as well. And where I think that certainly also our successes to me lead to where we see opportunity for greater improvement is also in working together, but in a different way. And that's where you see some of the recommendations and some of the changes that are being implemented here is really being purposeful in that relationship and how we can work together on workforce needs. And so if we don't have information around what the workforce plans are of a mine, what the business cases are, what the business plans are of a mine and what their workforce needs are, it makes it very difficult for us to work together and for us as a government to also be very purposeful in the programs that we have. So both of them are very intimately connected, but just kind of different angles on kind of one is a success in the past and one is an opportunity for the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ms. Reid, Emily Reid, anything further, would you, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the minister. I Towards the end of the presentation, there was a commentary around how these will tie and align with implementation of the MRA, which makes sense, of course. But tying the outcomes of what we're discussing today in a broad sense, so directly to the MRA could be frustrating for some folks on the outside looking in, considering that the MRA has taken a very long time and has not quite crossed the finish line of being in its own implementation. And I would just like to know perhaps if there is a timeline associated with this work outside of the MRA, or if they're so inextricably intertwined that there's just no way to do one without the other. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you for that. And to the minister.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So certainly, we want to make sure that the policy decisions and regulation decisions that are being made here are aligned with the policy and regulation decisions that are being made as far as the Mineral Resources Act regulation, so that we're not creating parallel work that at the end of the day doesn't match up or meet up. And that would be certainly a failure of this work. So it's important that they're connected and that we're not doing the work twice, essentially, at the end of the day. There are pieces outside of the MRA as well that continue to progress, and other areas where some of this work has already happened. So, for example, one of the things that was mentioned within the presentation is even though the changes that are being made to the Mineral Resources Act regulations will mandate and require socio-economic agreements to be signed with the government of the Northwest Territories, that work has already happened through the authority that's granted to the Mackenzie Valley Environmental Impact Review Board, and through the authority that they have through the MVRMA, Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act. Too many acronyms. And so there are pieces like that that are already happening and are already being implemented, for example, through environmental assessments. And so there are low-hanging fruit that is more short-term work that can be implemented, and then certainly some costly options and recommendations that are more long-term. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I believe there was two, and I think from the list I now have, Ms. Morgan's messaged us somewhere in the system, so I believe she's up next.
Oh, great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I take the point that has come out of the review that the SEAs have not been super effective at monitoring or doing anything in particular about the impacts. And I understand that companies specifically are not in a good position to sort of look at the broader impacts and identify what exactly has caused them, whether it's something specific that mine or that industry has done to establish the links. And so I understand or can appreciate the conclusion of, okay, let's pull back and focus on the benefit retention side of things. Where I'm concerned is that I'm not sure that we're replacing that with anything effective in terms of actually monitoring, collecting data, understanding the socioeconomic impacts. I know there was a reference in the presentation that this could just be taken care of by the regulatory process, the environmental assessment process. I just wanted to flag, so the most recent environmental audit noted or pointed out that while socioeconomic factors are commonly considered during an EA, it's not a mandatory consideration when it comes to permitting for land and water boards, for the actual licenses and permitting. And that there may be opportunities or need to look at some of the socioeconomic impacts without necessarily sending a project to EA. Like you would need to refer the project to an EA to even start talking about it, and that leaves a gap. And another concern I would have around this is that an EA process or a regulatory process, it's only as good as the contributions that interveners like GNBT departments can make. The boards themselves don't go out and collect data on their own, right? So they are sort of the recipient of others who can provide them with data and evidence to help make decisions. And so if we don't have a GNBT department or unit or mandate to be actively looking at the socioeconomic impacts, then there's sort of no one holding the ball, and there's no one to necessarily provide good data or, trends over time to the board. So then they have nothing to look at. And secondly, I'm concerned with who enforces board recommendations or terms of permits and licenses. So even if it does go to an EA process and concern is brought forward about socioeconomic impacts and there's some recommendation given, it's more clear on, say, environmental terms and conditions that, okay, ECC has an inspector, they're going to go out and monitor and look at whether or not the company did that and help with the enforcement side. But I'm not clear whose job that would be or on the socioeconomic side. Just to say, well, the boards are taking care of it. They don't necessarily have a mechanism or way to enforce their recommendations and license condition terms and conditions on their own. So I wonder if you can speak to whether you similarly see gaps in the EA process that in terms of dealing with the socioeconomic impacts, and if there will continue to be GNBT involvement or taking responsibility for those things going forward if it's not included within these formal SEAs. I know that was a long-winded preface, but hopefully you can understand what I'm getting at here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm looking for a volunteer. I'm looking for a volunteer on that yes or no. And everybody's looking at somebody else. Mr. Naris, will you take the question? I like that idea. Yeah, there you go. Oh, he leaned into the mic. No, so Minister, do you want to take the question or do you want to pass it on?
Start, Mr. Chair, and then I would like to pass along the table.
Oh, the long table.
Along
yes.
the table. No, I'm gonna start and then would certainly like to pass, because I think there's a few things happening here where there's a transition as well. And so definitely the enforcement of a socioeconomic agreement would fall to industry, tourism, and investment, because through the amendments that are being made, the requirement to have a signed socioeconomic agreement and the mandate to also ensure that proponents are completing HR plans, basically training and skills inventories, working together with the government to identify what their implementation plans of those socioeconomic agreements. That is going to be a reporting relationship to the government that ITI will maintain. And the reason that it's ITI as kind of the lead on that is because the kind of strong tool at the end of the day to ensure that the government is getting that information that it can then use is the production license. So To start and to get a production license, the socioeconomic agreement will need to exist and be signed by parties. And then to maintain the production license, that will be part of the equation. Certainly, as the government, we want to make sure that we're working with industry as much as possible. So reminders and working closely with them. So far, we're in a position where we can have regular meetings with industry leaders and make sure that they're aware of what we're after. And so certainly formalizing these asks will help that. At the end of the day, formalizing deadlines, formalizing templates of the information that we're looking for so we can be comparing apples to apples. So that would be the start of it. My understanding is that really removing that onus on using the authority of MVERB in order to kind of ensure SEAs are part of the equation is an ask and desire of MVERB, so they can really focus on their mandate. And so making sure that this is embedded, the socioeconomic agreements are embedded within the Mineral Resources Act regulations, and then ITI policies is going to be part of that as well. And then in addition, as far as how we make sure that we are working together and seeing change and seeing implementation really comes down to our ability to have access to that information, to have very purposeful relationships and purposeful programs that can be responsive to what it is that the northern workforce needs in order to make sure that these operations, that these companies have access to the skilled workforce that they're looking for at the end of the day, if that's the goal of that particular socioeconomic agreement. So making sure that we can be responsive, we can make sure that our programs match the need and are really in tune for what the North needs. And so there doesn't become that kind of disconnect between what a program is offering and what the workforce actually needs to get there, as an example. With that, Mr. Chair, can I also pass to Deputy Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment for some of the other kind of ins on that conversation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're back with 7 staff, so let's use them all today, starting with the Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to kind of just take it up a level, because what we're talking about, if we are talking about cumulative impact monitoring, this applies to all projects, not just mines. We will face it as a territory as major projects go through the environmental assessment. We've been through this with, the Cleat-Show Highway. And, there are so many different aspects of impacts, whether they're environment, whether they're water, whether they're social, whether they're health. And as a government, SEAs were a tool that I think we kind of invented on the fly, to really maximize the opportunity of the diamond mines. And frankly, I think they've done quite well, but we're learning from that. And this has always been a bit of a challenge. And, what should be covered under the regulatory processes. I don't think we fully addressed it, but as a government, within the GNWT, we do have a project assessment committee that look at major project, as projects, whether we're proponent, whether it's, external proponents. And the EA process defines responsible ministers based on, the nature of the impacts. So I don't really, but, what we've done here is for ITI to be responsible for things that are out of the scope is, a big responsibility. And what we've done is narrowed it down. So I would agree that the larger impact monitoring is a big piece of work. But really, we're looking to the MVRMA and those processes to really be that lead on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Ms. Morgan, MLA Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I realize that this is a big sort of abstract concept, so I'm just going to sort of give some examples or break it down a bit more. When you have new developments, infrastructure, industry, and I'm sure I'm not explaining things to you that you don't already know, but just for the general public. many times communities are concerned that there'll be, for example, like increased drugs or violence coming to their communities if suddenly people are making sort of huge amounts of cash or income that they didn't have before. There could be increase in family violence, for example, because especially with sort of rotation schedules, it sort of changes families and communities, and this can have profound impacts. But at the same time, it's really hard to link any of those trends or any individual incidents to, oh, it's the fault of that piece of infrastructure, or it's the fault of that mine or that industry. Like you can't make those kind of links, but at the same time, you can sometimes see broader trends that coincide, with some big change in infrastructure industry. And that's what the Deputy Minister was speaking to in terms of cumulative impacts. But I guess I understand the urge to sort of pass that along to, say, the review board and the regulatory process, that like maybe they can handle that or figure out that piece, because it's a complicated one to untangle. But I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure the boards are well equipped to sort of be the lead on that. And at the very basic level, my question is, if the teams at ITI that used to be focused on socioeconomic impacts are now only looking at benefits and benefit retention, is there anyone within the GNWT whose job it will be to monitor these kinds of social trends, things like violence, drug use, and whether it coincides with increased industry, and whether anything that's being done to try to mitigate that is actually working? Is it going to be someone's job going forward to care about that? Or is it just like maybe the review boards will figure it out, it's just not our job anymore within the GNWT? So that's, I guess, my basic question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. Minister.
Sorry, I keep pushing the button myself out of bad old habits. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So certainly the reason that Health and Social Services is in the room, along with Education, Culture and Employment and ITI, is there are many key partners in this work, and that's because the impacts and the cumulative impacts really are far-reaching throughout communities, and we want to make sure that we are not walking away from any of them. We have to make sure that we are putting everything on the table, and that could be as far as even like one of the things, the conversations in regards to major projects is even things like food and grocery stores for the workforce that's coming. So there's so many different pieces to these projects, certainly, that we want to make sure as a territory that we're thinking of and that we're prepared for. Currently, we definitely monitor across all programs in the territory. Health and Social Services is part of that work and are regularly reporting on it as well. And that can be everything from crimes and in communities, and then health impacts through public health as well. And then in addition to that, there's also kind of the work site itself. And so there's expectations that supports like employee mental health supports are available on the work site itself, and that we're thinking of not only the work site but the communities that surround and are impacted by the work that maybe their community members are partaking in. So and where the project really runs through in the territory that the region it sits in. For more detail than that on kind of the health side and the tracking of health indicators, Mr. Chair, I would need to make sure that I pass to Assistant Deputy Minister Matheson.
We'll allow her to find a seat. Perhaps someone can pull it on the side of DM Colfer. No. I mean, there's room for more. Yeah, just for room fit. Yeah, you can always pull it. Yeah, no, I realize that. So whenever you're ready, we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Health and Social Services regularly reports on lots of,
Maybe we're happy to hear from you louder. It's hard to hear
Okay.
from you over here.
I'm far away from the microphone,
Oh, I
guess.
meant your voice, sorry.
Health and Social Services regularly reports on a wide variety of indicators across all its programs and services. And as we know, and I think as has been said, like making direct linkages with specific projects is very challenging, especially in advance of the project happening. I give COVID as an example. Like, we are continuing to learn from the COVID and how it's impacted a variety of health and social services programs, from, draw upon family violence shelters, draw upon, just health centers. We're always counting people and services. And as members would be quite familiar with, it's largely where we identify our forced growth pressures. It's largely after the fact. So to be able to do that in advance, I think, is going to be challenging, and probably part of the work that lays ahead in figuring out how we can improve on that. But that's all for now.
Thank you, Adium. I now have in this particular order MLA McNeely, followed by MLA Narasu, and then further followed by MLA Morris, and then we'll work ourselves through the first round, as they say. That said, MLA McNeely, when you're ready to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question here is, how is ITI taking the recommendations from DRPA report 2022 and the SEA program redesign final report 2024 created from engagement with stakeholders, and how will ITI ensuring that both report recommendations will be implemented? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, certainly a phased approach, making sure that we're starting with some of those low-hanging fruit items, but for the finer detail, I'd like to pass to Assistant Deputy Minister Menzie McEachran, who can take us through that slide again. Thank you.
Thank you. ADM McEachran, if you would, please help us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so there's different, and thanks, Emily, for the question, different elements to the implementation, things that are underway right now, things that we will implement as the Mineral Resources Act regulations come into force, and as we operationalize those in a day-to-day business, and then other elements for future consideration, in other words, decisions that still need to be made based on those recommendations within GNWT. And so for, very briefly, for current implementation elements, things like the governance documentation is underway to sort of guide our work within this space across departments. We certainly know that it's a collaborative space and one that needs clarity on who's doing what, so that work is underway. Certain things that we thought were low-hanging fruit, like standardizing the time of reporting on data from mines, we've already moved forward with that. As well as seeking greater consistency in the data we're collecting through templates. And so we want to be able to, compare the data across projects and, be able to do better analysis for decision support, for adaptive program management, for better outcomes. And so that's part of it, and that work is already ongoing. And then, as I mentioned, there's some things that are MRA related, like the advisory board. We've seen these separate advisory boards for every single diamond mine, and we know that can be resource intensive, and then also doesn't sort of lend itself well to learnings that are across the sector, and we want to have a better understanding of what the opportunities are for improvements across the sector, or where the issues are across the sector, and hence the advisory board that will be enabled through the Mineral Resources Act regulations is what we think is a good approach to doing that. And then Minister spoke about just simply having the sort of enforcement capability of the MRA itself is useful because in requiring an SEA to get a production license, obviously every project wants to reach that stage of making money and get that production license, and so it's a key bar to set. And the compliance and enforcement is of those SEAs is really revolving around meeting information and reporting requirements. The minister spoke to things like HR plans, what do they need in terms of labor force demand or skills for different positions or different types of work throughout the life cycle of the project. We want to be able to be more targeted in terms of programming that can be matched to the needs of the projects, right skills, right time, and having this sort of MRA foundation and the authority to get the information we need from projects will be very useful for that. And then I think, the earlier conversation on how as a government we monitor and mitigate socioeconomic impacts. It's a dynamic one. ADM Matheson spoke to the fact that it's really tough to connect cause and effect when it comes to a lot of these socioeconomic impacts. They have usually multiple causes contributing to a particular impact or outcome. And to kind of disentangle that, always going to be a challenge. Nevertheless, it's still potentially a worthwhile consideration for GNWT as can there be improvements in how that's monitored and mitigated. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That was very detailed. MLA McNeely, please, if you want a second question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask a question first of all, followed up by a second one. Deputy Minister Strand, you had mentioned that this program will apply to the major projects that are coming in, correct?
Thank you, MLA McNeely. Deputy Minister Strand, if you would, please.
No, sorry, just to clarify that the SCA program would only apply to major mining projects, so specifically minerals. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Oh, that was your second question, unless that was just fleshing out your
No,
actual question.
I meant, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask that question followed up by a detailed question to the first one.
We'll give it a go.
Or the middle one.
We'll give it a go. Go ahead. Sneaky,
so-
but we'll give it a go.
Given that, and given the department's mandate to encourage and hopefully going from exploration to production, that's our ultimate goal. And we would see, or we, the government, would see sizable revenues through production sales. And so I really hope that the Rio Tinto claims in the Sahtu would prove productive. So I'm thinking your program to identify impact benefits and agreements and so on, what role do you see are playing with the regional land claim and industry in that particular case? Is there funding that you can give the land corporation to identify the other socioeconomic agreements you have here? Because you got to keep in mind that this Sahtu land claim has never seen a mining giant like Rio Tinto come into their area before. So what we're learning from here in the Slave Geological Area could apply there and help leadership saying, okay, we have this experience from this mining activity that went on northeast of Yellowknife that we can help you negotiate with this giant company that was already here in the Slave Geological Area, as particularly the diving mine. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA McNeely. I'm looking for a volunteer. Minister, if you would.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, certainly our jurisdiction over in ITI is under the Mineral Resources Act and through the socio-economic agreements. Certainly, there are still within the Mineral Resources Act the requirement for benefit agreements, and then also, of course, respect of settlement agreements as well. So certainly, we do have the advisory body that would also be able to help in those areas as new projects do start up and come online. And would want to make sure that we're supporting the kind of cooperation between agreements at the end of the day, and making sure that we are all in conversation together, which often does happen while also still respecting the relationship between industry and Indigenous governments for benefit agreements. One of the concerns certainly that's been raised at the table is to ensure that benefit agreements do stay as an agreement that is solely between industry and Indigenous governments, and we as GNWT certainly respect that and will continue to respect that. Also worth acknowledging is that the socioeconomic agreements do not and would not infringe on land settlement agreements either. Thank you.
Okay. I now have MLA Narasu and followed by MLA Morris. Mr. Narasu, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Looking at the socio-economic agreement, you have a technical advisory panel of 7 people, and with future development, or you said this is mainly in for the minerals. Would you look at expanding or including any other members for like further north? I don't see any Gwich'in or Nunavut or any other Indigenous governments on this group, or is this just mainly a targeted group for investments within their traditional area? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Narasu. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in short, yes, it would expand as more projects come online in other areas, but for more detail, I would really like to pass to Director Beck.
Thank you. Director Beck, you may want to pull the microphone a little towards you, but looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add on to what the minister said, the technical advisory panel made up of the Indigenous governments for the purposes of the Socio-Economic Agreement Program Review was those who had active projects and active socioeconomic agreements, or SEAs. That would be expanded as more projects come online in either the petroleum or mineral sectors to include those Indigenous governments whose traditional lands the projects are on. That is part of the MRA work that we are doing, is identifying, providing a tool and criteria for including Indigenous governments going forward. So that is part of the regulatory process going forward.
Okay, thank you. MLA Narasu, please, for your second question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we were in Toronto, there's a lot of these presenters that stated that the North has to be ready for any development. A lot of the presenters I heard stated that fact that and I believe that we are not ready yet, especially in the terms of training and hiring opportunities. How this it states that key areas agreement to prioritize is hiring and training. So how ready are we to include all of the NWT and training opportunities if the respective Indigenous governments come knocking at your door? Would you be able to assist them along with maybe the federal government or in collaboration with all 3 organizations? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that, MLA Narasu. Minister, if you would, with that question, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, certainly I think that this is one of the key areas where we definitely have work to do as far as socioeconomic agreements. I will definitely say I think that given the hats I wear, I'm also biased in this area. But definitely I think there is work to do. Do I think that we need to be ready? Absolutely. Do I think we have work to do? Absolutely. I think that this is part of some of the mandated changes as well that are happening, where there will be an onus to mandate industry in the Northwest Territories to provide us with their human resources plans, to be able to provide us with their identification or inventory of current skill sets and then future skill needs as well, so that we can be working very purposefully together in where they're going and what they need, and making sure that we're working with local residents in order to address those needs. And so I think that this pairs really importantly and really quite beautifully with the work that's being done in the JK to 12 area, where we're creating a foundation, because we need to be able to have our students ready for this work and for training opportunities. And then we have work to do right now to make sure that we've got training opportunities that can be available in communities across the Northwest Territories. So do we have work to do? Absolutely we do. And I believe that this is one of the areas that we should have seen more progress in the last 25 years in, and this is an opportunity for us to do it right, and we can't let that go.
Thank you, Minister. Just before I go to MLA Morris, I just want to point out that we're abutting very closely, if not swiftly, our 90-minute deadline of process-wise. We're coming up on 3 o'clock. Is not to be treated as a criticism, but that was a very detailed, long presentation. I think we were trying to cap it at 15 minutes, and sometimes it's almost impossible to put the genie in the bottle back again. There's so much to be told about this story, and hence maybe the problem is we're booking the non-appropriate time in a good relation to the timing needed. So I have MLA Morris before me. I have at least 2 questions, and that said, I want to be respectful. We have 8 people here today. To be clear, I'm referring to the government side. That's a lot of brain power and money all tied up here for the briefing, and it's as important as it is. I know you folks have other things to do as well. That said, I'll get to MLA Morris without rushing. We'd like to at least get a full round without feeling impeded. Thank you. And as such, take your time, please. Appropriate time. MLA Morris.
Okay, just to be clear, do we have a time constraint?
I was waiting till we get through the first round to adjust from there and see on the urgency of committee.
Okay.
I just don't want you to feel rushed on your question, knowing we're on their limit. Thank you.
I don't, if we don't have a time constraint. Okay, so yeah, I think the past couple answers to the last questions have been good in segueing into what I wanted to talk about, and as we've been talking about enforcement in particular, which I do have a question about next. I do find myself, as we're having this conversation, wondering if putting some of the requirements we're talking about on the companies is really the best way to achieve what we're looking to do. And I think that that's been emphasized a lot through, as Shauna mentioned, board proceedings and by many people in the past, as we've talked about how these projects can benefit people in the North. But I think that the limiting factor and the difficulty here is that, you know, these companies don't have the ability to build up, say, an education system or ensure that all the pieces are in place to ensure that socioeconomic benefits can be well realized from these projects. I see things like that as being better suited to the mandate of government under different areas, such as health needs to worry about it in different ways, the impacts of economic development and ensuring that those are mitigated, and then thinking about, like, you know, building up an education system. So I guess what I want to think about with regards to these socioeconomic agreements and the enforcement that we're talking about is, do we need to take a bit of a simpler view of what companies are individually responsible for, such as employment numbers, hiring from local programs that are created, and what the government is doing to create the foundation for success, such as collecting adequate economic rent from companies and using that money to build, say, a robust heritage fund, and using money from that to build up our education system and ensure that training is in place. So like, I think there's kind of a wider holistic picture to how we can best ensure socioeconomic benefits are captured. And then what do we actually require of the companies? Because I think, you know, if I was one of these companies coming up here for the first time, I'd be a bit puzzled as to what exactly my responsibilities are and where those responsibilities end in terms of how much they need to build up a system to ensure that the benefits are realized, as opposed to doing what they are good at, which is providing employment and you know, mitigating environmental impacts and things like that. So I'm curious to frame that as a bit of a question in terms of like, where do we draw the line? Because I think the minister and staff have already started to hint at that, and I am kind of curious, like, how deep are we going to go in terms of what we're requiring of individual companies? Because we're talking about enforcement. That'll be my next question. But what exactly are we talking about enforcing is maybe what I'm trying to ask.
Thank you for that. Minister, if you would, with that question, please.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start at the end and work my way back. So what exactly are we talking about enforcing? Really, we're talking about enforcing information sharing, because information sharing at this point is what leads us to be able to work together at the end of the day. So that's the reporting pieces on HR plans, the inventory of skill sets, and these are some of the examples. And then also the business plans. And so what do you have now? What do you need in the future, and how do we work together to get there? There's no space, in my opinion, for this to be one person's role or responsibility. And I think that's sometimes what gets us into trouble, is if everybody goes, you know, the Spider-Man meme where everybody starts pointing at each other rather than recognizing that we all have a role to play. And so some of the conversations that have occurred late, and it's not about the GNWT taking on all of it either. We have to have a relationship with active employers at the table too. And I'm very happy to say that conversations that I've been having with employers, they want to provide us, like with I will say, with new minds coming on side, they want to provide us with workforce development plans as soon as they have them, because they want to figure out how to work together, because they're also in conversations with landowners, with Indigenous governments, about how to work together. And so understanding what commitments they're making and how to go about fulfilling those commitments is also important, because while socioeconomic agreements are different than benefit agreements, there are often commonalities between them. One of the key differences, though, are benefit agreements are certainly more enforceable at the end of the day. I will also say that we've been working also closely with a lot of the labor force employers in the Northwest Territories. So, for example, working with Indigenous development corporations who end up being a lot of the subcontractors at different mining operations. And they're really turning their minds to the workforce development side and the training on the job and how we can work together to do some of that work. And so not just Indigenous Development Corporation, but also there are businesses in the North who are actually embedding on-the-job trainers into their businesses, so that rather than having to send somebody out who's no longer on the job site, and if somebody, you know, has a family or has housing concerns, they don't want to leave the North. They want to stay in their home community. And so that having an embedded trainer also allows these companies to get the training they need on the job while someone is also doing billable hours. So there's kind of, I don't think there's one way to come about this. I think it has to be a hybrid solution, and in the same vein, it has to be multiple people adding to it. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, if I can pass to the Deputy Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment on that side as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We look forward to the further detail. Deputy Minister, go for it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. And the Minister is referring to some of the ongoing engagement that we've had that has pointed out some areas where we can improve our workforce and training programs. It's hard to imagine that just a few months ago we weren't thinking about the sea change that's happened in the projects that are poised to go forward. So we're pivoting, and we need to work quickly to make sure that we meet the moment and take maximum advantage of what's going to be available out there for Northerners. And part of that is making sure that we have a trained workforce, you know, and expanded workforce, so that projects aren't competing for the same pool of Northerners and Indigenous Northern workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Ms. Emily Morris? Yes, if you would, for your second question, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate those answers, and yeah, we'll reflect on those a little bit too. I think what I wanted to understand in terms of the enforcement, so the minister said at the start of her comments there that enforcement will be about information sharing, but this is where I was kind of starting to wonder what we actually really mean by enforcement, and what this new regulatory unit at ITI is going to be enforcing. Because I mean, just thinking about something as cut and dry as security, I mean, or maybe an even better way of putting this is not security, but like requirements to have finalized closure and reclamation plans. That's been kind of a sort of a notorious difficulty in the regulatory system, and that's dealing with water licenses that have set conditions saying you will have such and such a plan. So we're not going to have, or maybe we are going to have, like some kind of legislative framework saying you will have this, and the other thing. And so I'm trying to understand, like, what exactly will the requirements be that this unit is going to be enforcing? Like, is the company going to be required to maintain certain employment numbers? Is the company simply going to be required to have a bit of a vague plan? And if a vague plan is all that they've got and it's a presence-absence test, how are we really going to be effective in ensuring that the socioeconomic benefits are being realized through enforcement? This is why I was starting to go in the direction of, like, is this really on the company to, like, have to do this? Or is it, so that's what I'm trying to better understand is, like, what exactly will we be enforcing? Because I bring up the example of regulatory because, you know, there's an item where, you know, it is like it's laid out exactly what needs to be there. And you know, in many cases, it's been difficult for companies to provide what's being looked for, and it hasn't resulted in like projects getting shut down, and I'm not suggesting it should have, but it was a difficult thing for everybody involved in the system to figure out how to squeeze that out of the system, is like getting a plan finalized and done. So I'm envisioning the socioeconomic agreements being even less tangible than that. And so I'm curious how we're going to be effective at enforcing it in a regulatory way. And yeah, I'm just curious how it's going to work. I realize that's quite a big question, but it's the question I have.
Thank you, MLA. Looks like Deputy Minister Strand has been volunteered for this particular one, so please, when you're ready.
A big question, but I'll try and be short. So in regards to the socioeconomic agreements within the new regulatory division, we are not enforcing the targets. We are looking at softer tools for us to be able to achieve better outcomes. Why we're taking that approach is because of that shared responsibility that the member just talked about, what our role is as government, you know, to develop a trained workforce, all those pieces like that. You know, each project depends on so many variables, you know, availability of the workforce in a community. Is that workforce, you know, ready? So looking at the levers that we can and are willing to are, like the minister talked about, the HR plan, workforce needs, what training, what succession planning programs are you going to put in place? You know, we want entry levels, if they have aspirations, to be able to move up, to find a clear path. And how can we enable that through government programs, or, you know, we can find gaps in other programs to fill that, so that we can work collectively to achieve those outcomes. So the SCA enforcement with, you know, will be all about reporting and plans and that iterative kind of joint work at this point. Separately, I will talk about the regulatory division. The enforcement pieces that you'll see in the MRA could be, you know, royalties, for example, the payment and filing of royalties. They have what the current mining recorder office has for the requirements to maintain mineral tenure, such as lease payments, work requirements, so that, is all embedded within that regulatory division and will be within the MRA. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you for that. Okay, so that now is one round. I'm going to squeeze in maybe a couple of questions. And what I'm going to then pose to committee, even though we're across the Rubicon on time, I'm going to see if anyone has any further urgent questions we will make sure we get out. So it looks like I only have 2 questions, but I think I have 3 questions with respect to detail, if you could follow up for committee on committee's behalf. My first question is built around Slide 10, similar to many of the colleagues have already pointed out, the making people responsible for the impacts and the mitigation. I just want to point out an anomaly that maybe needs to be underscored. A company gives an employee a car, as in here's a car, it's yours, it's not tied to the business, but the individual is now speeding. So are you now saying the company is responsible for the individual speeding? So in others picking up the ticket. I mean, that's how I read this interpretation of the final, making them somewhat responsible for the negative impacts of this type of new growth and relationship. I mean, I would say that this is territory that you need to be conscious about how you take control or make them responsible. No different than the most famous, and I won't say their name today because we're told we're not allowed to say names, but are one of our more famous coffee places, and you see the coffee cups littered around. I mean, do we make that coffee company responsible for bad choices of individuals, or we'll say less good choices, as I often say. So I'll build that into the first question with maybe second piece, which is, I think in follow-up to MLA McNeely's question, just to be clear, Phase 3 sounds like it's coming after the MRAs, but is work not being worked on this at this time, and do you have any information you can provide? Thank you. So 2 in 1 question. I'm just trying to keep it moving along. Thank you. So looking for a volunteer on the impacts. With you, Minister, please.
Certainly, I can start, and then I'll see if anybody has anything that they'd like to add. One of the things that I think is really important is that every project is going to look different. And also every project is going to be in a different region, which has different expectations and different asks. And so certainly it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that there are different factors that need to be considered in socioeconomic agreements and even benefit agreements. So for example, with benefit agreements, you may have Indigenous governments that are really focused on local employment. You may have others that are focused on equity ownership and really making sure that we're not looking at this as a one-size-fits-all is going to be really important. And we also have to make sure that when we're looking at socioeconomic agreements that we are reviewing them, that they are considered living documents, and that we are shifting as the North changes, as times change, and that we are being reasonable in our ask as well. So, for us to say we want, an operation to have 100% northern employment, absolutely, that would be great. But it might not be realistic at the end of the day, because there might be certain skill sets that we don't have in the North. And so really, how do we be realistic in our ask and also be ambitious and make sure that we're working together in order to fill those identified skill gaps that exist with employers. And from there, maybe I'll see if any of my colleagues would like to add to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Without tying up too much time, I just want to point out that it was the line that jumped out. It said there is no dedicated program specifically designed to address negative socio impacts of resource development. Hence, I gave the example of the car. Who's ultimately responsible other than the individual, same as the coffee cup. So, I mean, I'm giving you a simple example. It's oversimplified, but the principle is much the same. So I'm pushing, saying, are you thinking about this, and how far are we extending the responsibility? Seems like a far reach. That's really, and I'll go to, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page of my direction I was going on. So, Deputy Minister, if you would, please.
Yes, we are thinking of that, but I think that we're not intending, thank you for identifying that language, to introduce a new program isn't what we're intending here. It's to figure out where the responsibilities best sit. For example, as the minister said, every project is going to have different factors, different pieces to measure, different pieces to monitor. And how that is identified, whether it's in, the environmental assessment or elsewhere, being more flexible and letting that process unfold rather than dictate it within the SEA program, because that is not within ITI's mandate. But yes, we are saying that this is what we can do right now, and the rest are pieces that we do actually have to figure out as a government. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. I suspect it's early days, but I just want to be conscientious about how that's passed on. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just point out, I'll ask the questions in the sense of if you could follow up with further information. It probably requires a bit of detail. I'll ask them all three at the same time, that way you'll get them, and maybe what I'll do is maybe if you could clarify if reasonable. So for example, on page 3, it'll make sense when we go through them. In page 3, you see the party-specific exemptions. So my query more is about what are some exemption examples. Do you have a list of them you can share? And, can you explain why, does the Committee on Internal Trade share the views of these particular exemptions? And that area was highlighted on slide 3. The second, and if you could provide it in writing to committee, I would be curious officially on the record what an exemption looks like. So in other words, you could say it's sneakers, type of thing, and we make them here, and that's why we have them as an example. Second question for further information, if I could, slide 5, the DARPA produced 14 recommendations in 12 areas. So my question was really about what are the findings of these areas, and could you share that with committee specifically? You highlight the topics and you highlight, some of the things in the direction you want to go, but I'd be curious, and I'm sure committee would be curious as to what the findings were on that. Slide 4, we have the GWT contracted, again, DARPA, and I think there was some comment about it being available or published in 2024. And my understanding is the staff couldn't find that response. So the SEA program redesigned final report, we understand it may be published. And if we get clarification if it has been published publicly, if it is not, could it be sent to committee for some type of consideration? And I did say maybe a practical example, and I'm referring to slide 3 of maybe a couple examples of what the exemptions are the NWT is holding on to in that trade. That's back to slide 3. Just curious on a couple. It's nice to say exemptions, but I'm curious what they mean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I'll go through these in order that you presented them. So for example of party-specific exemptions that the Northwest Territories has, some of those would allow us to, for example, have benefits of our oil and gas. Others allow us to have, for example, the business incentive policy, which we work hard to maintain. But when we, at the table on internal trade last year, we did have a conversation about them, and really the information within the Canada Free Trade Agreement on the Northwest Territories is not one that we in the Northwest Territories see as a massive barrier to internal trade. It really is about supporting our developing economy here in the Northwest Territories. And so that's why we have opted to continue to maintain those. But certainly happy to share those with committee. Number 2, the 14 recommendations, very happy to share those specifically with committee. And number 3, is the final report published anywhere publicly? It is not, and I'm more than happy to share that with committee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I'm sure committee will look forward to reviewing that. And of course, specific to that, if we have more questions, we'll obviously call upon you folks. That said, we've reached the time, but I'm not releasing the minister and staff yet. I'm going to go to the committee just one more round in case anyone has any urgent questions. That's why I framed it the way I did the last time. So if MLA Morris wondered why I didn't ask for more time, I was going to say, hey, do we need more time before we get it? So I'll go to MLA Morgan first. She raised her hand first, and then MLA Morris, and if we could probably keep it to at least one question, and McNeely. That way we can keep time efficient, and hopefully we can help everyone work this through. So MLA Morgan, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Luckily, I do have one question. So recommendation 13 out of the 14 recommendations that DPRA came up with, recommendation 13 was around education and training. And part of that recommendation was that these targeted skill development programs should be delivered in small communities so that there could be better access and better uptake by community members who might not be able or willing to leave their community to take these kinds of training. I have heard in some instances that people wanting to do, for example, certain trades programs through Aurora College are being told, no, they can't get those kinds of programs in their communities. They're going to have to leave. So what is being done to ensure that some of the programs that now might only be offered outside communities can be sort of tweaked, changed, or maybe we can work with Aurora College in some cases to actually improve the status quo to ensure that more programs than currently are being offered can be offered to people right in their home communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MLA Morgan. Looking for anybody who wants to jump on that question. Minister, if you would, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So this is certainly a very, very live conversation and a very important one right now, given the opportunities that exist in front of us. Certainly training in small communities and at minimum in regional centers is a huge part of the conversations that are very live right now. Certainly having these conversations with different employers in the territory as to, and an example that I just used was Indigenous Development Corporations, but it has to extend beyond that to specific employers and how we can basically work together. And including with Aurora College in that conversation as well. There are different Indigenous governments as well that are pursuing essentially trainers to be brought in or different solutions that might look different, like for example, outfitting a CCAN rather than trying to build an entire bricks and mortar facility as an example. So definitely looking at different solutions. And then different ways that ECE can support some of that. So some of it is, for example, different pieces of kind of funding programs through ECE that allow employers to bring in a trainer or allow them to, if they want, send somebody out. But as you said, or as the member said, definitely people want to be able to stay at home. There's concern over, keeping families together, making sure that people can stay in their home. And then also wanting their support system around them, because of that really at the end of the day equals success. So we are working with essentially to say that this is all unfolding right now in real time. And I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. I think the solutions need to reflect the first of all, trade need of different communities or trade interest of different communities, and also the resources that they have available to them in that specific region. So it's work that is not only taking place between education, culture, and employment and ITI, but also the new Associate Deputy Minister of the Readiness Division for these major projects, because making sure people have access to trades training and in small communities is going to be critical for our support of benefit retention for these projects.
And thank you for that. I'm now going to go to MLA Morris for his last question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I mean, if I can quickly, just at a high level, I think that what I heard the department saying during the presentation is that, the DPRA report and its recommendations are going to be considered and incorporated into the work that's being done on the MRA. But I also hear some language happening that is kind of pushing us away from some of the recommendations of the report. And just in response to the question that I last had, about, you know, employment numbers, for example. I mean, one recommendation 5 of the report stated to improve accountability of the SEA's signatories to help ensure achievement of commitments. It's recommended that the language used in the SEAs be strengthened through hard targets and penalties for non-compliance. So that was one recommendation. I mean, notwithstanding what I said earlier about, you know, we need to, as a government, be working on the framework around ensuring success ourselves. I do think it's worth, I guess I'll just ask about that, just about whether or not we do think it's a good idea to have hard targets. And to be clear, I mean, I met with somebody on the industry side about this, and this was one of the criticisms that they had of this very aspect, is just that that there haven't been penalties associated with employment. It's always been kind of an aspirational target, and they shared with me they felt that it should have been enforced more actively, because it would have forced them to really pull up their socks and be like, how the heck do we get people trained up and into these positions, as opposed to just, we couldn't quite meet the target this time. If you set the target ahead of time and everybody knows what they have to do to achieve it, and when I think of, when we're using words like enforcement, I think that there has to be some kind of teeth associated with it that come into play if targets aren't met. Otherwise, it's hard to call it enforcement. So I would just kind of point to the recommendations of the report, emphasize them, and encourage the department to take them at face value where they can, and incorporate it into the work that we're doing. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but I don't know if you want to respond.
Thank you, Minister. Do you have any comments with respect to MLA Morris's comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, certainly I want the Northwest Territories to be successful. I want residents to be successful, and I want us working with industry as much as possible through essentially these negotiated contracts that we enter into with them, which means that we both have to show up, we both have to be in agreement, we both have to be making these commitments, and both have responsibility to them at the end of the day. I wanted to use to share an example of how hard targets can sometimes hurt us or not tell the whole story. So there's been a lot of conversation lately about our disappointment in how northern employment numbers in Giant Mine have gone down. And so I looked into them and asked the department to look in, because when I'm talking to northern employers, they were telling me that their numbers have actually gone up. And so something wasn't reconciling for me. We know that procurement is looking good, but the northern employment numbers are down. But as these projects expand, as more opportunities expand in the Northwest Territories, it means that the amount of people working on these sites has gone up. And even though, for example, with Giant Mine, we've got an additional we've got more people working on the Giant Mine site, because there's more going on the site. It looks like our numbers have gone down, but they haven't. It's just that there's more people working on the site, more people that are needed for the site. And so sometimes our percentages don't actually tell the full story. Exactly. And so I think that is really important to consider. And also important to consider is that as different projects come online in the Northwest Territories, a lot of the projects are next to people's or closer to people's home communities. And so there's going to be less of an onus on different projects for people to travel. And so they may choose to actually participate in projects that are closer to home and may not be part of the same family of socioeconomic agreements. And so as we're building Mackenzie Valley Highway, working on the Arctic Economic Security Corridor, as people are working at different mine sites or on different, school projects, for example, we're going to have less of a labor pool to pull from. And so our socioeconomic agreements that if we add hard targets to might not actually be telling the right story. So I think it's important that we are considering all different indicators, especially as opportunities in the North change, because we need to make sure that our employment numbers are healthy, but people might also be choosing not to travel from home for some of these work placements as more opportunities closer to home become available. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you for that. MLA McNeely, if you're ready for your last question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and mine's not really a question. I see more work to do and more expectations from this department. I think the minister for bringing both deputy ministers here, I think it's grateful to the questions and looking at some of the discussions that we've been having on the incoming projects. And the size of the magnitude of these projects, it's still shocking. So I'm going to draw you a picture which emphasizes readiness, particularly in training and employment, just like what this committee stands for on the last E of SCIDI. So as we mentioned, when I say we, I'm speaking on behalf of the SA2. So the scope of the work for the Mackenzie Valley Highway, and it's going to lead up to opportunities, training, and employment. And even training could be emphasized as job shadowing in preparation. So if you look at that scope there, it's been said, it's the price tag is $6 billion. And the scope is 800 kilometers plus 2 bridges from Wrigley to Inuvik. And 70% of that right-of-way is in the SA2, so 70% of that budget's going to be spent in the SA2. And when you look at the land claim, the land claim is designed so that 2 districts, independent of each another, negotiate A and B agreements, as per Chapter 21. On the Gwich'in side, it's Chapter 20. So if you say, okay, 2 districts, 70%, which is equivalent to $4.2 billion, is going to be spent in that area. Divide that to another half, because you got District 1 and Toledo and Norman Wells, and you got District 2 in the Gashgodena District and Fort Good Hope and Colville. But the impacted community directly to that right-of-way is Toledo, Norman Wells, and Fort Good Hope. And the proximity of Fort Good Hope is 2 kilometers away. And the proximity of Norman Wells is going within the community boundary. And the proximity of Toledo, the road is going adjacent to the existing airport, within walking distance. So you can see the magnitude of the money spent and the opportunities it's going to present in terms of training. So I'm going to ask one question. I'm hoping that your department is going to be behind readiness training. And those communities, if you look at $2.1 billion for a project going beside Fort Good Hope, a population of 650 people, you take the youth and the kids off of that, it's to me, it's just mind-boggling, and I can't emphasize enough, our government has to be ready and help these communities get ready and emphasize the opportunities, not only in a commerce community, but in an employment community, and share that economic tsunami that's coming. So I just share that, and I look forward to your commitment on working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, any comment there? Please, if you would.
I very much have a comment to that one, Mr. Chair. Commitment to work together, absolutely. I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to do this. Definitely, we need to make sure, community readiness is a huge part of this. Northern readiness is a huge part of this. And if we want to have benefit retention, not just for these projects to be built, but also to be able to maintain them. Like the skill sets that are required to build these projects initially, if we don't have them in communities, we certainly want them, because that's the same type of trades needs that we're going to need to maintain these projects, that we're going to need to, not only these infrastructure projects, but also the other ones that are happening at the same time and in parallel to this, like housing projects. Who's going to maintain all of this infrastructure that we're very actively investing in and attracting the investment to the territory for? So there's not only a need today, but a need tomorrow, because this These opportunities cannot be about outfitting the North and then it all disappears. It has to be about lifting the North, and we have to make sure that we are capturing this opportunity and that we're working together in order to do that. It also is going to require all of us working together, because it's not just about making sure that there's access to training, access to education. It's about making sure that residents know about it and residents see themselves in it. And I think that's where all of us come in to the table as leaders in this territory, and making sure that we're working with leaders who aren't here right now today. Because we're going to have to make sure that residents who are part of the workforce or want to be part of the workforce today are aware and are empowered, but then also youth, because this isn't just a today project. This is years of opportunity. So we need our youth to see themselves in this work as well, because as soon as a kid sees an opportunity that is enticing to them and is exciting to them, all of a sudden they're interested in that dated, like all of a sudden going to school has a different meaning to it when you know what you're learning in math is relevant to something you want to do. So I think it's very important all across the board. Thank you.
Okay. That's excellent. Thank you so much. Just very quickly, I'm going to squeeze in one more, and then I'm going as others, and I think we're at a wraps, so I'll get one in just like everyone else. There's so many questions. We'll send the rest in writing. How about that? So we don't. But I think that maybe we'll focus in around the advisory board. If you could flesh that one out a little quicker. I mean, I've got questions about recommendations and whatnot. I mean, they may not be that much of interest to the public, but it will matter to committee. And I mean, our millions of subscribers online, that's when I say the public. The advisory board, I believe that's slide 9. If you could maybe sort of flesh that one out a little bit. My understanding is the intent is to provide some advice. How will that be relied upon? Will the department resource this advisory board? You know, is it a new body per se? Is it created internally? Does it have external people, in other words, industry or lay people involved? And is it intended to create any paperwork? In other words, a report of recommendations? Are the meetings public in the sense of that people will be able to follow along to see what's actually happening and discuss? So I'll focus my last question on that area, and the rest I'll see about putting them in writing for you, just so folks can work towards the end of our day. So, Minister, if you would, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pass to Director Beck to jump into the weeds on this one. Thank you.
Fair enough. Director Beck, look forward to your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a new body. It would be comprised of Indigenous governments whose land the projects are, and those projects that would be identified as those that are active in the Northwest Territories at that time. So if it was today, you would have the Det'anchogh Socio-Economic Agreement, you would have the EDE Socio-Economic Agreement, and Det'anchogh until closure. So those would encompass all of the Indigenous governments whose traditional lands those projects touch. So that would be the composition of the board. To your next point, so yes, it would be a new body that doesn't exist today. Those are the folks who would be part of it. And for the reporting of it and the commitments, it would also include a requirement for the proponents to be participating in it, and the Government of the Northwest Territories, where we evaluate the performance metrics of the socioeconomic agreements as a collective and work towards actions or targets to be able to improve and maximize the benefits of that reporting. So we would all take takeaways within our respective areas, Indigenous governments, the proponent, and GNWT to work towards a plan to, over the next period of time, to address and improve the performance. Is there public reporting? The portion that we are at in the regulation development is the existence of the Technical Advisory Board. Some of the more policy and implementation elements haven't formally been addressed, but there is reporting anticipated.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for my favorite answer today. Thank you. All right, folks, unless there's any absolutely burning questions we have to get on the public record at this particular time, I'm not seeing any. at all. At this particular moment, I'll ask the Minister if she has any final comments as we work towards a close. Minister, if you would.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and all of that to say thank you to committee for both your time and also allowing us to provide a very detailed presentation, because we know that there is a lot of public interest on this one. And then also to thank committee for their questions today.
Thank you, Minister, and I sincerely want to thank the team she has brought here today. We have a lot of talent here, and I think we're grateful for their time, but appreciative of the benefit of what people are able to share with us today. That said, this is a very important opportunity, as you pointed out, Minister, for the public, and of course there are millions of subscribers, as I always like to remind people. It's very important to be in tune with your public government and what they're doing. That said, as I finish off, I want to thank everyone and wish everyone a great day, and that now brings today's proceedings to a close. Thank you.